Are you ready to take your business to the next level? Every day there are countless books and articles that are published offering the key on how to make your business a success. It's easy to feel overwhelmed trying to keep up and run your business. That's why Deb Creer created the Business Power Hour. Keep up on the latest trends, best practices, and techniques for how to make your business a success. Let the Business Power Hour do the heavy work for you.
Good morning. Good morning. I am Deb Creer, and I am passionate about giving professionals the tools that they need to make themselves and their businesses as successful as possible. And I know I say this a lot, but this is a program that pertains to every single person. Whether you are a business owner, an employee, a family, any of these things, what we're going to be talking about today really does apply to everyone. So please join me in welcoming Patrick Hardy to our program today. Welcome, Patrick. How are you?
I'm just fine, Deb. How are you doing today?
I am hunky and dory. So, doing fantastic. We're recording this on a Friday. So, we're real good, right? Although we're recording it on Friday the 13th.
We are. As I was about to say, it's Friday the 13th. That's definitely. So it kind of evens out.
It does. Right. Well, let me tell people just a little bit about you, and then we will jump into this because this is going to be a great discussion. So Patrick Hardy is the founder and CEO of Dysaster, the largest small business disaster management company in the U.S., a certified emergency manager and master business continuity professional. He has been a disaster professional for over 20 years. In the summer of 2012, he became the youngest person ever selected as the National Private Sector Representative to the Federal Emergency Management Agency, or FEMA. He is now a content creator and YouTuber who takes on the most difficult disaster challenges in the world, such as doing CPR for 28 hours straight, evacuating 240 cats in 90 minutes, and now I love this one, building the world's first emergency structure out of Lego blocks. In 2024, Patrick published his first book, Design Any Disaster, the revolutionary method to master your next crisis or emergency, from Benbella Books. And we will have links to everything in our show notes. So again, Patrick, welcome.
Well, thank you very much for having me. I appreciate it. I'm excited to be able to talk to you today.
Great. Well, I always like finding out from my guests how it is that they got to where they are today. So tell us a little bit more about that.
It all started when I joined the swim team. That's really how it came out. I was in high school and I love to swim. I'm an ocean guy. I grew up in a place called Orange County, California, where there's a lot of beaches. There's a lot of sunlight. There's a lot of swimming pools. There's a lot of everything. So it's all about water. So I decided to join the swim team one year, and they said, well, and let me preface by saying this. At the time, I was only about 5'6", maybe 110, maybe 120 pounds.
Soaking wet, right?
Right. So I was not exactly the build for an Olympic swimmer, but what they did say was they said, listen, we need someone who's willing to do the long distance swims. Okay. The 500, the 1,000, and the mile.
Wow.
And I said, love it. I'll do it. And so I swam all throughout the season, and I was terrible. But I learned how to swim really long distances, and I really enjoyed it. And I actually was one of the hardest workers on the team because I really just wanted to do the best that I possibly could. Right. But here's the rub. At the end of the season, my coach was bringing around a lot of the guys who are, they were probably Olympic quality. I mean, some of these people were swimming unbelievable distances for incredible times. And he said, listen, there's an opportunity for people to become a lifeguard. And I said, lifeguarding. And he said, well, Patrick, I don't know if that's really for you, but there's these other guys who I think they're really strong swimmers. You have to swim across a lake. You have to run all the way back to the front of the lake. You got to cross it again and run all the way back again. And so I don't think that's going to be good for you. You're not a good enough swimmer. And that's when I decided to do it.
Mm-hmm.
And I tried
They
out.
challenged you.
And of all the people who tried out, I was, of all those guys who are magnificent swimmers, nothing wrong with them,
Mm-hmm.
I outdid them. In fact, I don't think a single one even finished
Wow.
because I had trained for that all season.
Right.
I was doing 500. I was doing 1,000, doing a mile when they were only swimming, 50 yards, 100 yards, sprinting.
Right. They could sprint.
Exactly. So it's like asking a sprinter to run a marathon. Right. And so the marathon runners are going to do much better. And I was a better runner, everything else. So anyway, I became a lifeguard. And then after a couple of seasons of that, they said, well, a bunch of us want to become EMTs. So I said,
sure.
Great, I'm going to go. Right. So I became an EMT. And then a bunch of them said, we're going to become a medic. And I said, great, going to do that too. And so I did that. And I was going to college at the same time. So while that was going on vocationally, on an educational level, I was studying political science. I was in college. And here's the thing, Deb. I don't know what your major was in college, but I was a political science, international. Political science. So I studied, I like the dynamic between countries, particularly in diplomacy. So I had many courses where you learned about global famine, nuclear weapons, the crisis in the Middle East, all those things. And everybody had a cause, something that really mattered to them, that they saw, okay, I'm going to solve world peace. I'm going to make this happen. I didn't have anything. I didn't have anything. So summer after I graduated, I was standing around my parents' house and it was August of 2005. And August 28th of 2005 changed my life forever. That was the day that Hurricane Katrina made landfall. And in the days and weeks that followed that, I followed that news story assiduously. And I said, you know what? We are the most powerful country that's ever existed on planet Earth. We're the most powerful political unit that's ever existed. We can project military power around the world. We can put a man on the moon. As a famous gangster once said, the U.S. government can do anything it wants. It won 2 world wars and it prints its own money. And that's how powerful we are. But yet, during Hurricane Katrina, we were a mess.
Right.
And that's when I said, wait a minute. I can meld my vocational background as a first responder and as a political scientist. And so I wrote a letter to the governor and I said, I'm a nobody. But I graduated top of my class in all my majors, and I want to become a great emergency professional. I'm a first responder. And I got a phone call from the chief of staff.
Oh, my.
Saying, we'd never gotten a letter like that. And I said, well, I really want to do this. And she said, I guess you really do. So I'll tell you what we're going to do. We'll give you a free place to live. You're going to live in the state police barracks. That's where you're going to live. We'll give you free food. So you'll get 3 meals a day at the cafeteria. We'll give you a PT Cruiser to drive around. So just as old PT Cruiser. And here's the best part, $1,500 a month. That's it. But we will also allow you to train at any of the Homeland Security training facilities around the United States. Anything you want to do, any training you want. In return, you agree to work for us 120 hours a week.
Wow.
And I said, you know what? I'm on the next plane.
I'm a kid.
Why not? And because as a matter of fact, it's kind of really interesting, Deb. I was actually on a business podcast about a month or two ago. And so I said that I related the same story, a little short and more of a shortened version, but I related to him. And so after I answered the question, it got really quiet for a while and I could hear him scribbling. And so I said, what's going on? He goes, I figured out that you worked for like 2 cents an hour or something like that. He calculated 120
You got free room and board.
But here's the thing. It wasn't just the free room and board. It was the experience. Because Hurricane Katrina was clearly the seminal event of the 21st century.
They're still having issues.
Exactly. And Louisiana, even today, is still not fully recovered from Hurricane Katrina. And I said, this is a chance to see this evolution in place. I got to be in great meetings. I got to see President Bush. I got to see all these amazing governors. I got to see how it is that when a state deals with an incredible crucible like this, how do they react? and how do we improve it? And
Right.
it was the greatest internship. Well, it really wasn't an internship. I was technically a consultant. It was the greatest consultancy I'd ever done in my entire career.
I love it. And then you decided this was what you were going to do with your life.
It was. I left government. I went to Great Britain and I studied emergency management in Europe. I wanted to
Okay.
see how European systems did emergency management because I
Mhm.
wanted to have a global perspective.
Right.
And then I returned. And while I was in Britain, I won a student business prize. I won £7,500. That's what
Ooh.
I won.
hmm
And so I turned that into, and I started a business in my dorm room in Britain. And when I got back to the United States after I finished my master's thesis, I started a business and I made it the largest small business disaster company in the United States. So I worked with restaurants and bars and nursing homes and alligator farms and all kinds of wonderful businesses. And I got to see what the entrepreneurial
Right.
spirit really was
hmm
and how do we
hmm
protect it. And so it's been a wonderful journey and
hmm
unorthodox. Anyone who's seen my CV goes, I've never seen anybody with a
Yeah,
background.
I was looking at, yeah, holy cow. Hmm Right.
It's wonderful because, Deb, good guy. And I like to be able to pave new roads. I like to try new things. I want to be able to do something that's groundbreaking and innovative because I said the old ways need to evolve and keep up with the
Right.
times, both with the age of computing as well as the age of social media and the age of millennials growing up now who've never known a world without the internet,
Right.
period.
Yeah.
And we have to follow up with that. So we live in a very modern age. So, and that's
Right.
what I thought. And so that's what I've been doing. And I just left recently. I hired a CEO take over for me. And now I'm a content creator.
I love it. I
So
love it. And so many things to unpack now, right? I can see why that person was scribbling feverishly. Um, and I said it at the start. This applies to everyone. And I think a lot of times we think big businesses need to plan for this. No, a one person business needs to plan for this. A family needs to plan. A one person, needs to think about the what ifs. And I think a lot of people, for one thing, that it's never going to happen to them, right? Oh, never going to happen to them. And and then we're just ostriches. We're just going to bury our heads in the sand. And then the other thing is we think it's too hard. No, I don't want to
right,
do that. It's way
right.
too hard. And it's actually not. It was funny. I told somebody the other day, I said, we need to all just be Boy Scouts and always be prepared. And I think that really is kind of the crux of what this comes down to. And we're not thinking about what if the biggest, ickiest, catastrophic thing could happen. It's what if smaller things could happen that could grow. And I loved in some of your information, you say, it can be an incident or a disruption, but it could become a disaster or a crisis based on how you respond. So talk to us a little bit more about that.
My motto is prepare for a disaster and you'll never experience one.
Mm-hmm.
I say that to people all the time and they
Mm-hmm.
wonder, well, what are you talking about? So you're
Right.
going to prevent hurricanes? I go, no, you're not going to prevent
Mm-hmm.
hurricanes.
Mm-hmm.
We're not going to prevent earthquakes.
Right.
We're not going to prevent volcanic
Mm-hmm.
eruptions, and nor would we want to.
Mm-hmm.
That is a very natural
Right.
event.
Mm-hmm.
It's supposed to occur.
Mm-hmm.
We live on Earth, which is sort
Mm-hmm.
of not geostatic. I mean, there
Mm-hmm.
are things on the Earth that are constantly moving around. Plates are moving.
Mm-hmm.
Things are going to happen. But what the difference is when that interfaces
Mm-hmm.
and disrupts,
Mm-hmm.
keyword, especially for those of you who are
Mm-hmm.
business owners,
Mm-hmm.
disrupts what you are
Mm-hmm.
doing, disrupts your business
Mm-hmm.
model to the extent where it affects your
Mm-hmm.
people, your
Mm-hmm.
processes, your profit,
Mm-hmm.
right? So one of the things that I say is when we look at any event, it doesn't have to be a volcanic eruption.
Mm-hmm.
It could be a really negative customer review, which
Right.
turns into two,
Mm-hmm.
3,
Mm-hmm.
10, and there's a way to
Mm-hmm.
stop that. And so when I talk to companies
Mm-hmm.
about working in
Mm-hmm.
disruption, I tell them, I don't want you to think about it in terms of this is a disaster. I
Mm-hmm.
don't want you to think about it. I want you to think about like this is a disruption to my
Mm-hmm.
routine. And so I'm going to have processes in
Mm-hmm.
place so that I can remain
Mm-hmm.
continuous. I can continue my people, processes, and profit
Mm-hmm.
so that no matter what, my operations don't turn into a disaster,
Right.
because that's when disasters occur. What I tell
Mhm.
people is, this is the definition of a disaster. Disaster is this: when an incident or a disruption makes you weaker.
Mhm.
If the incident or disruption makes you stronger, that's not a disaster anymore.
Right. You learned from it. Woohoo. Mhm.
Yes, and not only that,
Mhm.
exactly. And so when I work in hurricane zones, I actually talk to clients sometimes
Mhm.
who've been through massive hurricanes, and they go, "Oh, I can't believe we made it through this." And I said, "You know, it's such a disaster." I said, "This wasn't a
Mhm.
disaster at all." Like, what
Mhm.
do you mean? You had everything planned in place. Was it hard to do
Mhm.
this? Of course.
Mhm.
I've been in business for 15 years.
Mhm.
Business is not easy.
Mhm.
Deb, you've been doing this for a really long
Mhm.
time. Being in business is
Mhm.
difficult.
Right.
And I said, just think of this
Mhm.
as anything else, like the
Mhm.
financial crisis of
Mhm.
2008, which you and I were talking
Mhm.
about before we actually
Mhm.
hopped on air here,
Right.
is that these are disruptions
Mhm.
to our routine. What's
Mhm.
going on politically, regardless of
Mhm.
where you sit
Mhm.
on the
Mhm.
political spectrum,
Mhm.
there are things that are going to
Mhm.
impact your day-to-day
Mhm.
operations,
Right.
whether it's
Mhm.
tariffs, or whether it's
Mhm.
economic
Mhm.
corrections, or whether it's a geopolitical
Mhm.
crisis. But what we boil down to, as I say, is if we prepare you enough in advance,
Mhm.
I can position you to actually be in better shape
Mhm.
afterwards.
Right.
Because while you're going, your competitors are out of business.
Mhm. Right.
While they're still correcting and coming back, you're already there.
Mhm. Right.
You're already in a place
Mhm.
where things are automatic. You know
Mhm.
what has to happen next. And that is when I find
Mhm.
people are in the best prepared
Mhm.
shape, so that they never have to actually experience a disaster, even when one is occurring all around them.
Right. And of course, COVID was probably one of the best examples of that. The when we saw how companies pivoted, there's a big restaurant not far from us, and they shut down for the period of time that they were supposed to shut down. And here in Georgia, they actually opened things up a lot sooner than in many other states. And so they said, okay, you can do drive through, you can do all of that stuff. So this restaurant knocked out part of a wall and built a drive through.
Love it.
And I love
Love
this
it.
part, they cut their menu down, right? Because they had like one of those pretty menus that had 900 pages with, it was like, no, what are the things we serve the most? That's going to be, and they're still going strong with that, because we all did it and thought, ooh, we want to do that again. I don't want to, I want to get my food and come home and watch TV. I don't want to sit in the restaurant. Or Jack Daniel's Distillery, this is still one of my favorite stories. They stopped producing whiskey because sadly that was not considered an essential item, but they started producing hand sanitizer. And
Right.
what they
Yeah.
did was, the biggest thing was, of course, they kept their employees working. And so that, of course, has a huge trickle effect, right? And they're not doing that. I don't think you could probably, go there and get hand sanitizer. You're back to being able to get alcohol. But they took it and they went, what can we do to still continue? And my assumption is they had at least a basis of a plan in place before COVID ever even hit. Or maybe just really smart people. But yeah, I mean, it's something that we all should really just be thinking about. The what happens if.
But one of the things I say to folks is that when they look at these plans, they think, oh, they
Mm-hmm.
have to be really formidable. And I
Mm-hmm.
said, no, 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 no. Your disaster preparedness, regardless of whether it's a
Mm-hmm.
plan or no plan, and we'll talk about
Mm-hmm.
that, is down to, do you leave yourself enough
Mm-hmm.
options
Right.
so that you are flexible
Mm-hmm.
enough that you can pick from the
Mm-hmm.
options? It's when you do nothing,
Mm-hmm.
that's when your options become very limited,
Right.
because
Yeah.
now you're in a place where you are chained to the
Mm-hmm.
events. So
Mm-hmm.
whatever the events
Mm-hmm.
are, the
Mm-hmm.
vagaries of whatever
Mm-hmm.
happens, you are now chained to that. Where instead, I say to folks, you need to be flexible
Mm-hmm.
enough that you can move.
Mm-hmm.
What we say in business is pivoting, right? You
Mm-hmm.
can pivot very
Mm-hmm.
rapidly from one thing to the next. I love that story about Jack Daniels, because we have in California,
Mm-hmm.
we have a ton of outdoor hospitality here.
Right. Mm-hmm.
We're talking about
Mm-hmm.
campgrounds,
Mm-hmm.
RV parks,
Mm-hmm.
and modular communities
Mm-hmm.
as well. But one of the things that we did was, initially they said, well, all outdoor hospitality has to close. And
Right.
then immediately the industry lobbied and
Mm-hmm.
said, and went to the governor
Mm-hmm.
and said, listen, you want people outside. You want people.
Yeah, get the germs dispersing.
Yeah, right, exactly. Right, on top of it. And in addition, it helps people's mental health,
Yes.
right? It's
Fresh air,
wonderful.
sunshine.
No, well, yeah, absolutely, no doubt. I mean, because one of the things that for me, even though I live in Sacramento, and Sacramento is a very long way from a beach, I still go to a local lake
Right.
here. That's about 30 minutes north of here. Every Saturday, and tomorrow's included, I go on a board and I spend 3.5 hours. I paddle all the way in the far end of the lake, and I come all the way back because that is my time. No cell phone, no nothing. It's just me, the environment, the fish. It's just, it's a wonderful experience. I paddle with my hands all the way through. It's just such a wonderful thing to get back into it. And it does wonders. And so they made a very persuasive argument. And so what they did was, when the industry advocates had done that, the smart campgrounds went to people and said, come here and get away from COVID.
Right.
And people went.
Stay 6 feet apart.
Right. And even then, because, when you're outdoors, it's even less, right? They actually said when you're outdoors, you'd be like someone, I forgot the number. I don't want to be quoted and then somebody emailed me
shorter.
saying this was the number. It was like 3 feet or something like that. So they just said, come out here, enjoy the time with your family, whatever. And people did it in droves. And that was what was really smart. And that kept the industry alive because, and I was doing, I think I've done disaster planning for about 80% of all the campgrounds in California. So, I visited many of them, and they're in beautiful places. But if they don't have their plans up and they were not prepared, then what happens was they would have been tied to the events and trying to catch up when I said, let's stay ahead of it. They're not going to anticipate COVID, clearly.
Right.
They're not going to do that. But what they will do is saying, if there is a disruption to the number of people who can come into the park for whatever reason, have an alternate way to bring them here. That's how we do it.
Right. Well, and then you think about the other smaller things. What happens if they don't have power for a longer period of time? Water, things like that. I always tell people, some foreign entity wants to bring us down, cut our power. All right. But yeah, just those things, I live here in Atlanta, and we were here now I am from Colorado, but we were here during Snowmageddon. Right. And so this was 2013, I guess, 2013. And, and it was one of those, it truly was a perfect storm, right? What happened was everything shut down at the same time. They shut down schools, they shut down businesses, and they shut down the government and said, go home. We're getting snow. Yikes. I mean, it is Georgia. And so all of those people hit the roads and everything at the same time. And the roads just couldn't. I know people who spent 24 hours in their car on the interstate in middle of Atlanta because they could not move. It took my husband 10.5 hours to get home. And it was normally a 45-minute drive. People they didn't. And so now, of course, they've adapted to that. We see a snowflake and everything, it's like, and actually they pre-forecast, right? It's going to be bad tomorrow. Therefore, we're shutting down in advance. And they also know, okay, stair step it. Schools go first. When you had kids stuck on a school bus for 24 hours, that's not a good look. And the government then went last. And so, like you said, they've learned from those things, but that's fairly small. I mean, that's an inch of snow, and it was gone in a couple of days. My favorite is now they issue bread and milk warnings. So you're supposed to go to the grocery store and stock up on bread and milk. Right. And I laugh because I am from the mountains of Colorado, where our closest grocery store was 65 miles. So even to this day, we could live for a month probably on what is in our pantry and our freezer. It's just the way I was raised. And so I tell people, no, folks, it's wine and cheese that you're going to go stock up on. But yeah, it's just planning those, so what if your sprinkler system goes off in your business and you can't get in the building for a couple of days, or, a bigger thing, a fire, something like that. Can you work remotely? Now, most businesses have figured out, yes, we can. But I think a lot of people have gotten rather lax again, right? COVID was a while ago, so we're not thinking about it. But yeah, just the little things that you need to be thinking about that, really don't cause a lot of dead brain cells.
Well, I think what I think one of the big deals with businesses is that I think as I tried to warn them, I say, don't try to wing it. Don't
Right.
try to wing it. Because sometimes I'll get pushback. I'll have business owners say, well, I've been doing this for 50 some years. And I'll say, well, I'm telling you, there are events that you can't anticipate that'll put you out of business. And lo and behold, COVID put a lot of
Right.
those people out of business, including the person that actually said that to me, and which I thought was very interesting and not surprising. But one of the things that I try to make clear to business owners is I said, you need to be thinking now, if there is a disruption to your business, how do you ensure you need to be continuous? Then I take the next step. I say to them, how fast do you want to recover? And then the third thing I ask them, which is actually the first question I ask any business, is I say, do you want to recover at all?
Right.
I actually have businesses where I actually have written this into their disaster recovery plan. There was actually an Italian restaurant that was just north of the Bay Area, and I was working with them. And so I went to the business owner, and she was a restaurateur, 2-3 generations of chefs and things. And so I went to her and I said, do you want to recover if there's a wildfire? She was totally shocked. She couldn't believe that I would ask. She goes, why would you ask me that? And I said, because I need to understand you.
Right.
You as the business owner, not you, the restaurateur, you as the person. Do you want this business to recover if there's a disaster? Because if there isn't, I'll tell you what, place will burn to the ground. We'll get the insurance money and do something else. And she actually thought about it, came back to me and said, I don't want to recover. So
by that point, she was going to say, I'm done.
He actually said that. And I said, you know what? Awesome.
Right.
Great. I'm glad we established this now, because what I'm going to write in your disaster recovery plan is this. If we have a disaster, we're going to take the insurance money and do something else.
Right.
Which is fine. And the only thing I told her was, I said, you can do that. And I think that that's wonderful, because that's great for you. And I found out later she actually became a graphics designer for this big firm too.
She wanted to do something and kind of needed an excuse.
Yeah, she emailed me years later and said, I'm glad you wrote that in my plan, because I love doing this. I didn't want to be a chef anymore. I liked it when I was in my 20s, but in my 30s, I didn't want to do it anymore. And so I said, I'm glad you're happy. That's all that matters. But the one thing I told her at the time when I was writing the plan was, I said, listen, you can quit if you want, if there's a disaster. However, you need to inform the employees that is what you're going to do. So
right. We will pay you whatever. And
because during COVID, the biggest complaint, it's not even close. The biggest complaint that employees had to employers is, when are we reopening?
Right.
Why am I not hearing anything? Why don't I know what's going on? So when her business burned down, and it actually did burn down, when it burned down, the employees knew precisely what was going to happen. They knew they were each going to get a $500 buyout. Well, she called it a buyout. It wasn't a buyout, but she paid them $500, paid them their last paycheck, and said, best of luck to you. That means during the wildfire, while they're waiting, well, gee, is the restaurant going to reopen or not? They already knew. So they could already start looking for new jobs. She offered to help them. She said, anytime an employer wants to know about you, here's my phone number, 555-1212, whatever. And she got every single person employed somewhere else. And I said, that is the ideal. Now, so when I talk to audiences, I keynote all over the world. And so one of the things I do is I say to people, now you tell me, did she experience a disaster?
No.
And then they have to think about it, because they go, but wait a minute, her business burned down. It burned down. It's tragic, right? And they go, well, I guess not. I go, that's right. Because she gave herself the option to leave, gave the employees the option. What irritates me are business owners who say, well, just figure it out. Well, no. You're not just going to figure it out. It doesn't work like that. You have to know in advance what you're planning to do. Just like the same as if you were, expanding your business. I mean, I expanded my business. I bought 2 businesses. I mean, I didn't just buy the businesses and go, well, I wonder what to do now with those businesses. Like I bought them and incorporated them in my operations. I mean, that's what I did. And that's what you've got to do. And that's one of the things that these folks who run companies realize, that you've got to continue to push, because if you don't think of these options in advance, you're never going to do it when you're smelling the smoke.
Right. And to me, it's also business continuity planning. What happens if a senior executive keels over or quits, or all of those various things? I work with executives who have been diagnosed with cancer, and that's one of the things that we do is business continuity planning. Who signs your checks? If you can't be at work, who signs your checks? Is your business going to continue? I mean, that really could be, a big question. All of those things that they all go, it's in my head, right? I bet you've heard that all the time. Well, it's in my head. I know it. Well, what if you can't be there to answer those questions?
One of the most irresponsible things I've ever seen, and my father was actually a business continuity planner. He was a very highly regarded planner. He was the head of, he did it for the University of Southern California, the Getty Museums, Cal State Northridge, big university systems. And my father never made the business continuity plan secret. But I can tell you, I have consulted for companies before where I asked about the business continuity plan, and security would call me and put me in a room and say, you need to explain why you're asking for access to this document. And you better explain yourself right now or you're fired. I have the right to terminate your contract. And I said, well, you can terminate my contract. You're still paying me. Right. It doesn't matter, because I've written that in the provisions, because my dad had this problem too sometimes when he would be consulting and they would get irritated. But one of the things that I discovered is that with big companies, it comes down to they've bureaucratized it and said the continuity plan is top secret. And to this day, I have no idea why any business would do that. Right. Because you want your employees to know this. Right. Want them to know who's signing those checks. That's what the business continuity plan answers. Right.
You're not giving them the access to the bank account.
Exactly.
You're just saying,
we don't want them to have access to passwords. I was like, why is the passwords in the business continuity plan anyway? What is it doing in there? That should be a separate document.
Yes. Yeah.
I mean, well, that's the way we did it in the military, or that's the way we did it here, or that's the way we did it with this agency.
Well, then change it.
That's different, because when you're in the armed forces, when you're in law enforcement, you have a series of people who've passed through a gatekeep.
Yes. And so it's totally different than Bob in the mailroom having access to your bank account.
Yeah, exactly. Bob in the mailroom doesn't have top secret clearance. So you don't know. So you would never keep those documents together. But that's the justification I see. So what I tell them is, I say, you need to create a shortened one-page document. Right. 1 page, not 2 pages, not 3 pages, not 5 pages.
Because you can remember 1 page.
Exactly, because that's all employees are ever going to remember anyway. You just say, hey, listen. And frankly, what I say to them is, in a training, you need to look people in the eyeball, eyeball to eyeball, just like I'm doing right now with the camera. Eyeball to eyeball. This is what we are doing in a disaster.
Yes.
This is what we are doing to get you paid. This is what we intend to do. Because one of the things that people got really irritated with, especially millennials, was they would be working at Office X, and they would say, Office X is never reopening. They would say, well, wait a minute, this is where I live. Well, you gotta live somewhere else now. Now, had they been told that in advance, that would have let them know that if there is an interruption, I have a risk calculus. Right. I accept the risk. There's an earthquake. There's a chance I'm going to have to leave this apartment building. And frankly, if there's a major earthquake, you're going to have force majeure clauses anyway. We're not worried about paying a break lease. I mean, you're going to leave. Just like during COVID, they told people, you don't have to pay a lease.
Yeah.
If you break
it didn't matter if the business said no, you still had to do it. I mean,
but they had no idea what their employers were doing. And that was a major source of irritation. And I would go to bosses, and they would, these people had Harvard degrees. These were Ivy Leaguers. These were people who went to Europe and had education and worked for big companies. They were scratching their heads, going, why are employees so angry at us? And I'll be developing crisis messages for them, saying they are mad at you because you didn't tell them in advance. Right. That's why. Yeah. Well, I'm telling them now. It's too late.
Right.
That's too late. You tell them before.
Yeah. I'm a corporate communications person. And I know, I know that, even if you are telling them we don't know, that's better than nothing.
That's true.
Because nothing gets filled, right? We don't like a vacuum. And so we make stuff up, and we tend to make it up as the worst case scenario, So, even if you're saying, oh my gosh, Patrick, we don't know, but we will get you the answers as soon as we can, and we will keep you posted.
Right.
People are like,
okay,
you know what?
And what you just said is actually a lot of times what I tell companies to tell the media, because
Right.
there are times where there are small companies. We've actually gotten calls before in the middle of the night or in the early morning or the afternoon, where a company will get a phone call from a national media outlet. I'm not talking about, the local ABC affiliate, ABC 7 or 13 or whatever it is. I'm talking about CNN calls them about something that happened. Either money got stolen, or there was a national
Right.
implication, or a politician said something nasty about this business. And so now they have to deal with the fallout. And they say things like no comment. And I say, don't ever,
No,
ever
never.
say no comment. Just say to them, I don't know. I will find out. You will learn
Yep.
everything at 8 p.m., whatever. Then the media won't make things up,
Right.
or at least is less likely.
Or
I mean,
worse, they say they refused to comment.
right. Yeah. They refuse to answer our questions. Because businesses do this. I've actually called a business where actually it was a local company. They were not one of our clients, but they had gotten into a tiff with a police officer, and it was a local problem. And one of the cops had actually called me. He was a friend of mine. He said, listen, you may want to call this business because I know they mean well, but they made a mistake and they irritated a lot of people. And this is a very politically conservative area. I called them and said, stop doing what you're doing. Call the media and tell them what's going on right now. We don't know. Well, then tell them.
Yeah.
We will figure it out and talk to you. And that gives you time to get this result. Again, remember, options and flexibility. Don't try to have to do things right now. If you haven't planned, if you haven't figured this stuff out, Deb, you and I could talk about this all day.
Oh yeah.
You have no options.
Right. Right. And it's about planning. I shared with you before we started that many years ago I worked for ING, which is now Voya Financial, and I was the head of the crisis management team for 4 business units in Denver. Several, 1,000 employees, all sorts of stuff. And that was over September 11th. I mean, it was not a fun time to be in, doing this, but we definitely beefed up our crisis management because of that. But then we did this little thing, we practiced. What happens if, and like one of the things, our executives, 17-story building, our executives were, of course, on the 17th story or 17th floor. And so originally the crisis management plan said, if activated, and, we had all these little people who were supposed to be part of it, you go to the 17th floor. And we thought about that and we went, that's probably not really wise, because what if we get stuck on the 17th floor? And so the plan was you go to the lowest floor and you meet there, or you meet across the street at the library or whatever. But, but the thing was, it actually took several people going, oh, do we really want to do that? And there was like the other thing. Now, this was 20-ish years ago. And so one of the things that we discovered, because part of it was business continuity planning, what was most important, right? So it's an insurance company. And we figured out, much to everybody's chagrin and one department's delight, the most important department was the mail room, because everybody mailed their premiums. And so you had all these checks, and so it was, somebody has to figure out how you're going to get all those checks, and so we had an alternate address, and we worked it out with the post office. I mean, all this stuff. They also used our building as training for the fire department. Now that was really fun to plan, and so we evacuated, total evacuation. People were told, and so what we did, we turned off the phones. I mean, that just kind of simplified stuff. But we totally evacuated a 17-story building, and the fire department used it as training. But again, you're the mom and pop on the corner. What do you need to do? What are all of those things, or even your house? What if something happens at your house? We hear the things that say gather your kids in a certain place. Well, make sure your kids know where that place is supposed to be. I mean, all of that.
Yeah, and all these things are about, as I said, maximizing your options, right? So making sure that you can do that. So here's what I'm going to say. A lot of businesses think this is overwhelming. And you and I talk about a lot of these things because you and I are experienced with this stuff. We understand continuity planning. As I said, my father was a business continuity planner. I've been one for 20 years, and I understand this stuff pretty good. But I will say this. if you are a business, and I don't care if you are the largest company in the world or the smallest, no matter what, the very first thing, whenever there is a disruption at the business, the first question, the most important question you must ask, and you must constantly ask it throughout this disruption, whatever it is, you have to constantly ask this same question. Are we going to evacuate, shelter in place, or lock down?
Right.
No matter where you are, what you're doing, whether you're on a 17-story building or you're the noodle shop across the street, you're just in one tenant room, you have to be able to answer that question. Because what I tell people is I say every disaster, I don't care what it is, goes down to answering that question.
Right.
Because it'll tell you an awful lot about a business culture when you can't answer those things. And the reason why I say keep those three things open, because those are your options. You know, when I've been talking about options so much.
Yeah, there's not much more.
There's not much more. Those are the options. And I've actually had this before. I was actually keynoting in London, and somebody came up to me and said, well, I don't understand. What if there's a public relations disaster? Was that evacuation, shelter in place, and lockdown? And I said, okay, let's talk it through. So if you have a public relations disaster, can we evacuate the building? Sure. Because we want to avoid the national media, right? We could all evacuate and go home. So
there's nobody there to answer if they call.
Right. Or we could shelter in place here.
Keep working.
Could say we're going to fight this out. I mean, and by fighting, I don't mean fighting. I mean like we're going to work through it. Or we could do the third thing, which is what we call locking down. And locking down is generally not a good idea with public relations, but I provide it as an option no matter what, which is we ignore you. And I've literally had businesses.
The no comment.
Right, exactly. No comment. You know, everything's battened down.
Fortress of steel.
Metaphorical sense. Yeah, right, exactly. Everything on a metaphorical sense. Nobody in, nobody out. That's how we're going to do everything. But I said no. So when I talk to businesses, I said it doesn't have to be complicated. So for those of you who say, well, I got to write these plans and I got to train, do all these things, I go, it's a simple process. This is the process I go through, and this is a system that I've designed, and it simplifies it for everybody. Evacuate, shelter in place, and lock down. No matter where you are, know how to do those three things, and make sure your business, if you're running a business, make sure the business can metaphorically and literally do those three things, because it answers so many other things. All the other stuff is really pretty small. All the other decisions are, you know, not as important. But what it does is, if you figured those out in advance, now you have maximized your options. You can now do and give yourself enough time to sit, get out of the chaos, sit, focus, and do the next thing. It's when people start running around and making everything chaotic, that's when people make errors and businesses do things that put them out of business. Because I will say this to you, there was a really famous study, I don't know if you know this one, Deb, or not, but in 1993, the Disaster Recovery Institute conducted a very famous study. They studied all the small businesses that were involved in the World Trade Center attack of 1993. And for those of you who don't know, a terrorist named Ramzi Youssef, who was attached to Al-Qaeda. Nobody knew who Al-Qaeda was in 93.
Right. I think that's one of the first times we actually went, who?
Yeah, exactly. Who? And he placed truck bombs underneath the World Trade Centers and tried to knock the buildings over like dominoes. That was kind of his hope. It didn't work, of course. But what happened was a number of small businesses were disrupted. And what they discovered is they did a longitudinal study of all the small businesses that were impacted by that terrorist attack. And they discovered a fascinating fact. Of the small businesses that were not recovered, not recovered in 14 days, 80% of them went out of business in 5 years. 80%. Because in the end, what we are seeing right now with restaurants closing, I have a restaurant in Sacramento here that had been around for, I think, 90 years. After COVID, it just couldn't come back.
Right.
And it saddens me. The oldest Chinese restaurant in California closed because I don't know the intricacies of it, but I can just tell you that what they told the press was, we just couldn't recover after COVID. And this is in like 2024. I mean, we're not talking about like, 21. And so what I've said to companies, I say, if you plan in advance, you can do what you and I discussed with that Jack Daniels did or the outdoor hospitality folks did. Even if you don't have expensive consultants or lobbyists. You can put yourself in a position to be successful,
Right.
but you have to make the options yourself. If you don't do that, you are leaving
Mm-hmm.
yourself in a position where the events are going to run things for.
Right, right. You know, and obviously you consult with companies around the world. You know, and so one of the things you talk about is this the C3 methodology. So give us a little quick review of that.
It's a quick method I use. I call it, it's called the C3 method. It's command, communicate, and carry out. And that essentially, that method, I'll talk about it in a moment, but that method essentially answers this question that is so important. Who's in charge? In businesses, this happens all the time. I can't do anything till CEO so-and-so is here. I can't do anything till my manager tells me what to do. There was a hotel in Hawaii where they had an accidental nuclear alert. It was obviously a fake alert. And the hotel was being asked by guests, and this was a 5-star hotel. They were being asked by guests, what do we do? And the disaster plan literally read, contact the manager. So they contacted the manager, and the manager said, what does the disaster plan say? And the disaster thing said, the disaster plan says, call you. So that's one of the issues with organizing that I come up with. And taking command means I'm in charge. I am taking responsibility for what I'm doing. And I say this to high net worth families. I say this to small and large businesses. I say it to homeless folks. I actually work with homeless advocates sometimes for people who are dehomed. Whatever we have to do, you have to be in charge. And regardless of what you think is going on politically, for those of you, regardless of whether you support the president or not, in the end, his message is that there are agencies like FEMA that essentially are not going to be able to help you for various political reasons.
So you've got to do it.
You have to maximize your own options. That's why I talk about taking command. Communicating means establishing a team, creating a team of people around you. This is not like we have to have 100 people behind us. It means you, the news media, they're part of your team too. They're an information source. The weather service, they're on your team too, because you're asking them for whatever information. But you are relying on them to be part of that team. And then the last one is carry out. And what I tell the business owners is get things done. Stop fooling around. Stop waiting. Stop trying to figure things out. Start doing tasks. Because if you've taken command, you're communicating, and you know, and you have your options available to you, start making decisions, because the paralysis comes where, and I'm sure you've seen this too, I've seen this in big companies too, where they will say, what do you think? Well, so what do you think? So what do you think? What do you think? What do you think? And there's too much what do you thinks. And I go, and then they say, well, we have to make a decision collectively. And I go, no.
At some point, somebody needs to go, here's what we're doing.
That's right. And that's what I've said. I've said this to big pharma companies before, where they've hired me and they've been in crises before. And they have, they have C-suite folks who are, some of them are in their late 30s, some of them early 40s. They haven't been through a lot of crises. They were middle or advanced management, or they were technocrats, and they're kind of being pulled up. And I say, and they always go, well, I should defer to what everyone else says. And I go, but wait a minute, you have to make decisions, or this big, thick document that you people create doesn't mean anything, because it has to have somebody in charge of it. Someone has to be doing things. And that's why that is such an important method, because I say to folks, because the assumption people make is, well, if I do nothing, that's okay. Someone else will handle it.
Right. No.
And that's not going to work. And you know that very well, is that if you do, and big companies, small companies, all make that same error. And so what I say is, you are in charge. I do this all the time. Okay, so I'll go to a nursing home. And nursing homes, for those of you who don't know, assisted living facilities and skilled nursing facilities are basically the two large ones. And they have very complex and very hierarchical kind of business models. Okay, so they have business organization. So they'll have people in different spots. And so what I will do is, when I run a drill, I do this all the time. Say, the first thing, everybody, I don't know anyone in this room, okay? The first thing I want you all to do is take off your name tags. Now, take them all off. And I want you to put them face down on the table. And they go, why? And I say, I'll tell you why. So then there'll be 80 people in the room or so. So I'll get roughly half, and they'll do the drill again with the other half. So I'll have about 80 people in the room. And I'll say, okay, guys, so who in here has been in this company the least? Who's been working here for the least amount of time?
Right.
And there'll be somebody in the back, and I say, well, how long have you been working here? And they say, well, 10 days, 2 weeks, a month. Great. We're going to have a disaster today. Guess who's going to be in charge? And the managers are shocked because the managers are like, well, why can't I be in charge? I say, I'll tell you why, because I have now injured all 5 of you. So you cannot participate.
You cannot do it.
Right. So for the first 30 minutes, they can't like turn to you like Alex Trebek and say, well, this is the answer, right? Oh, yeah. Okay. That is the answer. You guys are going to sit on the side and you're going to watch, and your employees are going to work entirely on their own. And they go, well, why is that? And I say, because most of the time you're not here, quite frankly.
Yeah.
The vast majority of the day, 2/3 of the day, you're not here. You're here for 8 hours a day. These people are here for 8 hours a day, but those people but someone has to be here 24 hours a day. And in third shift, and so for those of you who've never worked in healthcare before, third shift is what they call the graveyard shift.
Right, the overnight shift.
Right, exactly, the overnight shift, because they don't use graveyard in healthcare for obvious reasons.
Yeah.
They always say third shift, or just like you said, the overnight. And those folks will be a skeleton crew. I mean, really, it'll be a very small group of folks.
You're not doing activities, you're not cooking, all that stuff.
No guests, no nothing. All you hear are beep, 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 various machines going off, and there's different things happening. It's very quiet. It's like a library. I'm serious. And they work like worker bees because they're a very small group of folks. But when I work with them, I empower them and say, look, I don't care the administrator isn't here. I don't care the director of nursing isn't here. I don't care that the head of admin isn't here. I don't care about any of that. I need to see whether or not you can make command decisions. So can you take control? Second, can you build a team around you? Third, can we execute what we need to get done? Because I've had this before. Managers will do, I don't know if you've seen this too. I've seen this happen a lot. They'll lock the emergency equipment in behind a door. And the only one who has the key is the boss.
Right. Who may or may not be there.
Right. I've actually had this before where I actually told them, I said, I want you to break the door down. And I said, we're going to break the lock off. We're actually going to snap the lock off.
It's not going to be locked ever again.
Yeah, right. Exactly. So there's no way to do this. And they said, well, we can't do that. I go, well, if you don't, then I'm going to take a crowbar and we're going to break the door open if we have to, because this was an emergency situation. This wasn't a drill I was running. This was for a real thing. And I said, we can't break the door open. We have to wait for so-and-so. And again, we can't do that. We have to break this open right now.
So-and-so's dead. Sorry to tell you, but
right. Yeah, or whatever. And that was a real emergency. And so we were saying, if we don't get this, people can't evacuate. So what I say to people is, could we take command? Yes. Could we assemble a team? Yes. But now, if we have things behind locked doors or we have administrative controls, that prevents us from getting things done. So we need to get things done and put us in a place where, perfect, we got it done, we can do it. So that's the reason why I put so much emphasis on people working together, because if you're going to answer the question, Deb, of evacuation, sheltering in place, and lockdown, it doesn't matter if your people are disorganized and leaderless. Now the question can't be answered because you have minimized your options. People have no clue. Okay, so everything's behind a locked door. Now that option is closed. Closed. You are limiting your options. Keep the options as open as you can. And for those of you who are business owners, I want to say this one last thing, Deb, because there's a lot of people on here who are business owners and things. Sometimes I hear this. I don't want to hear this from anyone here. Well, I don't trust my employees to do the right thing.
Yikes.
So I say to you, why are these people working for you then?
Yes, I know. If you don't trust them in an emergency, you're going to trust them with other things.
Right. You trust them with your clients, your customers or whatever. You trust them to run your company. You trust them with $1 million equipment. I've actually seen this before where like literally people getting paid like $9 an hour were in charge of like $1 million healthcare equipment, like radiology labs and things. They were just in charge of maintaining it. And I go, but you did that, but you don't trust these people to help you to evacuate people out of the building. And because you're not here at 1 a.m. and disasters occur in the middle of the night. In fact, I tell California residents, no one really knows why, but most earthquakes occur in the very early morning. No
Well,
one.
it seems like all of it. I mean, it's, people have babies at 2 o'clock in the morning, whatever it is,
Totally.
your smoke
Totally.
alarm beeps at 2 o'clock in the morning.
Yeah,
Yeah.
right, right. Yeah, exactly. Things happen.
Mm-hmm.
Things that happen to the routine. So
Mm-hmm.
when people say, "Well, I don't trust them," I go, "Well,
Mm-hmm.
why not?" And so that's why I do these videos. I did a cat video recently. You mentioned at the top of the broadcast,
Mm-hmm.
which was I evacuated 240 cats in 90 minutes.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't do that alone. I
Mm-hmm.
had other people with me, but the
Mm-hmm.
point was, if you watch the video, it's on my
Mm-hmm.
YouTube channel. I actually said to the senior staff, you can't be involved. The
Mm-hmm.
only people who can be involved in the beginning are just two other
Mm-hmm.
people, and the three of
Mm-hmm.
us laid the
Mm-hmm.
groundwork. We got the cats evacuated safely. Not
Mm-hmm.
one animal was injured. Nothing
Oh.
happened,
Mm-hmm.
and we got them all off the property.
Mm-hmm.
And this is a cat sanctuary in Northern
Mm-hmm.
California. And I wanted people to see on camera,
Mm-hmm.
not just taking my word for it when I
Right.
say it in podcast stuff,
Mm-hmm.
that you can, if you empower
Mm-hmm.
people, you could do that.
Right.
One person
Right.
who doesn't work
Mm-hmm.
there and two people who are just
Mm-hmm.
line
Mm-hmm.
employees all ran
Right.
this massive
Mm-hmm.
disaster response. And that's really
Right.
how it happens.
Mm-hmm.
That's where the magic
Mm-hmm.
happens.
Right. Well, and when you empower them to do that, you're probably going to empower them to do other things. So your business as a whole should benefit.
And the thing is that I say this all the time, Deb, is I say, look, you'd be amazed at what people can do when you give them the
Mm-hmm.
ability to. When
Right.
you empower them
Mm-hmm.
and make them successful. Because my dad was a manager for
Mm-hmm.
what, 30, 40
Mm-hmm.
years. He was always about letting people be
Mm-hmm.
able to be successful. He's
Mm-hmm.
always saw his role, no matter what his title
Mm-hmm.
said. My dad used to do this all the time. He used to flip his title, which used to be on this
Mm-hmm.
brass plaque they used to give him or whatever. He always flipped it over because he didn't care.
Mm-hmm.
He always said, as long as I'm empowering you for
Mm-hmm.
success, that's what matters,
Right.
not my
Mm-hmm.
title. And
Mm-hmm.
I do the same thing when I
Mm-hmm.
worked with my employees. I never said, Patrick Hardy CEO or whatever.
Yes.
Doesn't say
Mm-hmm.
that because I like, and if people had to troubleshoot
Mm-hmm.
things, I'd say, let's figure this
Mm-hmm.
out right now so that people felt
Mm-hmm.
like they could be
Mm-hmm.
successful even if
Mm-hmm.
I wasn't directing them
Mm-hmm.
moment to moment to moment
Right.
to moment, because that's
Mm-hmm.
really the way it has to
Mm-hmm.
go. So, and in disasters, that's what you have to allow
Mm-hmm.
people to do, because
Mm-hmm.
if you don't, people will
Mm-hmm.
leave, people will
Right.
quit.
Right. And they might do it at the worst possible time. So, but well, oh my gosh, Patrick, this has been now, yes, this is kind of one of those things that I just, get really excited about talking about, but it is so absolutely critical for everyone. And I'm thinking we need to have you on like every year to remind people to do this, all that good stuff. But until then, for people who are saying, okay, we need to work with you, Patrick, how do they find you and what are the services that you provide?
Best way to find me is disasterpatrick.com. Again, disasterpatrick, no underscores, no nothing, normal spelling, disasterpatrick.com. And on there, I do a lot of things. So I'm a keynote speaker. I keynote all over the world. So if you're looking for a great keynote speaker, I was a national champion in college and I hold a lot of speaking awards. So I would love to come out and energize. I also do consulting. So I coach. And I'll actually go to a place. I'll actually just train everybody. I don't have to write your plans. I'll go there and I'll literally take your plan, your dusty red binder that nobody wants to look at.
That's sitting next to the marketing plan and
Exactly. And I'll make it so that it really is a wonderful day and empowers people. It'll feel a lot like those leadership retreats that people pay $20,000 a pop to go to. So those, and I'm a YouTuber. So and I actually have a podcast I'm launching myself. So just a short podcast where I'm telling people little tips and tricks on things to do as business owners. But as a YouTuber, I am taking on the most difficult disaster challenges. So for those of you who are out there, if you would like to challenge me for something in disasters, or even if you don't know, but you say, you know what, I'd like to have you come out. I am traveling around the country and I'm going to be doing lots of fun disaster things, because I want people to see disaster planning doesn't have to be awful. It doesn't have to be doom and gloom. It doesn't have to be any of those things. So please go on to disasterpatrick.com. We have a contact form there, and reach out or subscribe to my YouTube channel. You are going to see some amazing things, because the videos are meant to be really fun and engaging for you. And that's the whole point. And so even coming here today, I'll be promoting this. I really enjoy coming here and I would love to come back. There's so many different elements of crisis management. I'm sure you would agree with that too. If you talk about training, drills, equipment, so many wonderful things. But in the end, my hope to all of you is that you found everything I was telling you about today was useful to you, and that it helped demystify this process a little bit.
Right.
That's really what I was hoping to do. So I hope I was able to do that for everybody.
Oh, I love it. It has been a great discussion, and I really am looking forward to the next time that we talk. But I'm Deb Creer. I have been talking with Patrick Hardy of Dysaster. And until next time, everyone have a great day.
Tune in for our next program for even more trends, best practices, and techniques for how to make your business a success. The Business Power Hour, hosted by Deb Creer, is proud to be part of the C-Suite Network.